Hi, my name is Bryant Golden. I am the host of Unfiltered Radio, and I'm the lead pastor of Centerpoint Church in the Tampa, Florida area. And this program exists to start unfiltered conversations that inspire people to live with purpose. So regardless of your background, we really want to meet you where you are and help you on your life journey. Unfiltered Radio is also a listener-supported program. So if our messages have helped you and you want to help us continue the reach of this program around the country, you can go give a financial gift at unfilteredradio.com/donate. I hope today's message encourages you and inspires you. We're in a message series right now called Relationship Goals, and you guessed it, we're talking all about relationships, like how to define what a healthy relationship is, how to deal with some of the stuff from your past, and maybe how to deal with some of the expectations that all of us come into relationships with. So I think this will be really helpful, really practical, and I'm so glad you're listening. Let's dive into the message in our series, Relationship Goals. It's a little bit different. We're teaching this series together. And if you didn't get here for part one last week, go to the app. You can catch it on any podcast catcher, but that kind of sets the stage for where we're going in this series. And so last week we said, like, all of us have relationship goals at some level. We don't always know what they are. They're not clearly defined, but we have them. And a lot of times they're misguided based on unrealistic expectations. And so we got to define like what the goal actually is. Now, here's the thing. This is what we're going to talk about for a few minutes today. All of us come into any relationship, dating relationship, especially marriage relationship, with hopes, dreams, and desires. Like, all of us have them. Doesn't matter what your faith background is. Though I would argue it's like part of being made in the image of God. You have hopes, dreams, and desires that you're coming into the relationship with. And so you have to determine like what those are. So in any relationship, you have this idea of like how conflict should be handled. And like one of you was an internalizer, one of you was a screamer. 2-to-1 odds that you know who the screamer is in this relationship on stage.
It's both of us. Okay, let's just be fair.
Person to your left where you're sitting. And so you know, like if you grew up, one of you, it's like if you grew up in that home where just everybody screamed and then you were totally fine on the other side of it, and then you meet somebody who's an internalizer, and the first time you have an argument, they're in a fetal position in a corner somewhere thinking the relationship is over, and you're like, no, I'm good. I just had to get it out. So you have ideas about conflict. You have ideas about like who should do what, like in terms of, well, my mom always, my dad always, you know, when I grew up. And so like responsibilities and just kind of how you're going to do life and stuff around the house. You have ideas in regard to money. And apparently if you have this, you're shady with it. But you have ideas in like one of you's a budgeter, one of you's not a budgeter. Like we're at single income, we're going to be double income. You're going to have a side hustle. This is where we're going to, you know, you have goals in terms of where you're going to get. But like all of us have these like hopes, dreams, and desires in terms of money, how much money, how we're going to handle money. You have hopes, dreams, and desires in terms of vacation. One of you wants to go to the beach. One of you wants to go sledding somewhere or to the mountains. But you have those things. You have ideas in regard to kids. You want 2 girls. You want 2 boys. You don't want any kids. You want 1 boy. You had a boy, and you don't want any more kids. Again, you have ideas in terms of like what you're going to drive. Like for real, right? You have hopes, dreams, and desires. Like I had a great car when we got married that I had to get rid of. And so that killed some dreams early on. You decide that you're just going to give up on life and get a minivan, like whatever. I'm just playing.
We don't have one yet. We're holding off for as long as we can. I know, it's crazy.
So, but for real though, the built-in vacuum cleaner for every parent, like that's a huge plus, but still. You have ideas in terms of like how you're going to live. So we're going to rent, we're going to whatever, we're going to buy land and get goats. We're going to, you're part of the tiny house movement, like whatever. But everybody, and sometimes they're at odds, right? Like what their hopes and dreams are not yours. You have ideas in terms of scheduling. Like you come in, a lot of times you don't talk about this, but like you need me time, or you like, I want to do something with the friends every once in a while, or here's how I think how much we should work. This is how many times we take vacations. So you have all that. So a couple more. Holidays is a big one. Like how are we going to split up holidays if you haven't talked through that? And so maybe your wife is gracious enough. She was like, well, I'll just take Christmas and Thanksgiving. And then you can have Arbor Day and Halloween, President's Day, whatever. And then everybody, let's just be real, everybody's got hopes, dreams, and desires as it relates to sex. For guys, you're going to have a lot of it. And you're wondering what prop I have.
I bought these, so you're safe, all right? You're safe. You're safe.
But kind of on the negative side, like your hopes, dreams, and desires, that she's never going to show up in this ever. Ever.
And I left the tag on so that you know I bought that yesterday. Okay, so, yes.
So, my point is, I think that was it. My point is...
Should I take over?
You should. So,
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So what impacts what we decide that our hopes, dreams, and desires are the things that we've seen and heard in culture, in our familial experiences growing up, from our personalities, from previous relationships. And so what we end up doing is we have these hopes, dreams, and desires that we group together, and we're like, okay, these will help me avoid all of the bad things that I experienced and grew up with. And these will help me pursue all the good things that I want and all of the good things that we want to go after. The problem is that this is almost like a form of self-preservation and protection, because they become my hopes, my dreams, my desires. They become very self-centered. And when you get into a relationship with someone, you hand these off to them. You're like, okay, here's my hopes, my dreams, and my desires. And you hand these off to somebody, and they become expectations. And so the thought is that now this person who's carrying all your hopes, dreams, and desires, they're expected to meet every single one of them. And you don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, because, again, in your mind, you're avoiding all of the bad experiences and you're pursuing all of the good things. And these expectations are, as we define them, it's the strong belief that something will happen or come true in the future. You think this is a good thing. But the person who's living under the weight of it experiences pressure and tension, because what happens when they can't meet every single one of your expectations? What happens when they can't fulfill these things? And so it really becomes a pressure situation for them.
And like, that's the thing, like on this side of the box, if you just want to use this analogy, like these are so good. These are my hopes, my dreams, my desires. Why wouldn't you be on board with these? Yeah. Right? But on your side of the box, they just feel like expectations. Like it just feels like a weight. And here's what I talked about for a second last week that we're just going to kind of drill down on. And I just want to like make the point again. We probably made it 5 times. But those hopes, dreams, and desires are good. A lot of times, like you're trying to recreate something really good that you saw. Like we want that kind of relationship. And so it's kind of in this a canopy of like, this is a good thing to pursue. But it can go off the rails. And the thing is, it's so subtle that a lot of times you don't even know that it's happening. Like you've been married for a while and it's like, it's not terrible. But you've moved into this thing where there's some pressure. And how we described it last week is it starts to become a debt-debtor relationship. So like I owe you and you owe me because like, you know, again, my parents always, or we get in this thing of like, you're supposed to, or last year or next time or last time, like we went to your family and now, and I thought we said about the kids and, you know, we're going to pursue whatever, right? Yeah, this is how and it just becomes this thing, a lot of times somewhat unspoken, but it's you owe me and I owe you. And here's the thing that we started to talk about last week is we rarely express gratitude for what we come to expect. Like we just, like, if you hire somebody to come over to your house, like to do a job that you've contracted them to do, they're probably not going to show up on your Christmas card list at the end of that. Like it's somewhat transactional, right? Like you did a job, now I'm going to pay you for it. And what happens in marriage is it's subtle because like, obviously we move into routines. We move into like, and it's just naturally we divide like, depending on how we're wired or whatever. And in that, you just kind of get into a routine that's just absolutely natural. But what happens a lot of times is we settle for that and we just kind of get into that place where literally, and we kind of think there's no other choice. It's just like, well, we've been together for a while. We've been married for a little while. This is what they always do. And all of a sudden what happens is I'm never going to thank you when you do it, but I'm going to remind you when you don't. And what happens is owe you eliminates love you. And it doesn't mean you're not in love with each other, but you're having a very difficult time expressing it because when you get into this place where all of a sudden hopes, dreams, and desires become expectations and then they've got their expectations, it removes the margin for unconditional love to be recognized and to be appreciated.
Thanks again for listening to Unfiltered Radio. I want to encourage you to sign up for Bryant's weekly email. Bryant is the founder and host of Unfiltered Radio and the pastor of Centerpoint Church in Tampa, Florida. Every Monday, Bryant sends out an email that specifically addresses current cultural issues or everyday life, like stress, marriage, and work. We believe it'll inspire you to make changes and help answer the questions you're asking. So to sign up, just go to www.unfilteredradio.com. You can also follow Bryant on Facebook at Bryant Golden Unfiltered or on Instagram at Bryant Golden.
Our Unfiltered Radio audience continues to grow, not just in the local Tampa area, but literally around the world. And it's altering the stories of people's lives in the best possible way. The most recent story that I just got was from a guy by the name of Jason, who was in a place in his life where he was suicidal, he was without hope, and he happened to tune into one of our programs. And that program became the catalyst for him getting help around mental illness, beginning to find hope, and he began a relationship to follow Jesus. That's the kind of impact that this can have, and this is why Unfiltered exists, to start unfiltered conversations that inspire people to live with purpose. But I just want to let you know, this is completely funded by listeners. So those stories are only possible with your financial support. So if you've been impacted by this program and you are passionate about others finding life change and finding hope, would you just consider making a one-time or recurring gift at unfilteredradio.com? And we'd love to thank you for your generosity and your support by sending you a brand new ebook that I just wrote called How to Make Decisions When Everything is Uncertain. Because I don't have to tell you, there's more uncertainty right now than ever before. So we'd love to get that resource in your hands with your gift of any amount. And I just want to personally thank you for being a part of Unfiltered Radio and for your generous support. Hey, my name is Bryant Golden. I'm the host of this program called Unfiltered Radio, and I'm also the pastor of Centerpoint Church in the Tampa, Florida area. And if you're just joining us, we're in a series right now called Relationship Goals, and we're obviously talking all about relationships. And specifically today, we're right in the middle of a message where we're talking about what inevitably all of us come into relationship with, and that is we have hopes, we have dreams, we have desires, and they entail things like money, responsibilities, scheduling, calendar, traveling, like how that relationship is going to look as we move forward. And a lot of those have been influenced by what we've seen and heard, by what we maybe experienced growing up. But sometimes those expectations can move into a really unhealthy place. And a lot of times when we move into a relationship where it's all about expectations that in many cases we've never expressed, all of a sudden the gratitude in that relationship starts to dissipate, and we end up with relationship issues we don't know how to navigate around. And so today, I just want to help you with some of that. I'm so glad you're listening, and we're going to dive back into the next part of this series called Relationship Goals. Like, it's just very difficult because even when I'm working my hardest to go, hey, I know I've always done this. I know that this is kind of how it's been for 10 years, but I'm just telling you, I want to regain whatever. I want you to know that I love you. I want you to put your needs above my needs. And you're working with all that you've got to try to express that and communicate that to them. And they're not feeling or receiving what you're trying to express, and maybe vice versa, because you're just meeting an expectation. So it literally might be out of this heart of I just want to love you unconditionally. I want to re-fan the flames of Rome, whatever. And they're like, okay, but that's just what you should have done. That's what you've always done. That's what I've come to expect. I'll just say it this way and I'll move on. If I owe you money, I can't give you money. If you owe me money, you can't give me money. It's just seen as a payment. And a lot of times that's what happens in marriage. I'm doing the everyday routine, but it's literally out of heart of I want to love you. I want to put you above me. But you don't see that anymore. You don't receive that anymore because it's just what's expected. And what happens is it removes the margin for unconditional love and intimacy, and it just feels like you can never do enough. It just feels like you're not feeling what I'm trying to express, and I'm not feeling what you're trying to express. And it's not that you don't love each other, but you accidentally moved into a debt-debtor relationship of I owe you and you owe me. And now there's no margin to where the expectations are gone. So you actually get the opportunity of I want to express unconditional love to you. It's all been eliminated, and it's now just a debt-debtor kind of deal. And when that happens, something has to happen or give in the relationship.
Yeah, and usually one of four things happens. The first is that you end up leaving. And this can be the person who's leveraging the expectations because the other person is not, in their minds, cooperating, giving them what they need. They're not living up to their end of the bargain. And more often than not, though, this is the person who leaves is the person who's under the weight of the expectations because they just can't measure up. They can't make it happen for that other person. They just feel like a constant disappointment. And so you leave. The other thing is that you win. And this is the person who's leveraging the expectations. They end up winning. They end up coercing and convicting and controlling so much that the person who's under the weight of the expectations ends up, number 3, conforming. And this one's pretty dangerous because in this situation, I don't know if you've heard people talk about losing themselves in a marriage or a relationship, but this is when you end up losing yourself because you're so sick and tired of fighting and feeling the pressure and the tension that you just give up altogether and you completely become the person that this other person wants you to be. You abandon yourself altogether. And the interesting thing about it is that you feel as though you've come to a solution, right? You feel like you fixed the problem because the tension's gone, the pressure is gone. You're not fighting anymore. You're not arguing anymore. But yet you both in the long run will end up losing respect for each other. And it's not founded on unconditional love because you've just simply become what the other person wants you to become. So it's really pretty dangerous. But you end up leaving, winning, or conforming.
And in the winning one, basically strongest personality wins.
Yeah, exactly.
So who do you think would win?
Well, let's let the people vote. I'm joking. I'm joking.
So
I'm not really, though.
And
I'm
with
joking.
winning, it's like coercing. It's like, oh, well, the way your family did it was stupid. We got to do it this way. Or that's just wrong. Or this is better. And so it just becomes this thing of like control, coercion, what is sometimes guilt. And then the fourth thing is the most subtle thing. And that is you just compromise. And you're like, oh, okay, so that's probably what the message is about. Here's how we avoid all of this. Because we have inadvertently got the idea that actually compromise is the goal in marriage. I'm not going to ask you to raise hands, but like you probably read books or you whatever. It's like you've talked to people and it's like, well, that's the goal. Like that's the bullseye. That's the relationship goal. # relationship goal, compromise in marriage. It's going to be a great marriage. Maybe some of you, you grew up with parents or maybe it was your aunt and uncle or somebody you were close to or whatever. But there was this marriage that like they were married for a long time and then you would sit down and talk to them and they're like, well, we just figured it out. Like we just figured it. It's hard at times. I mean, we had to roll through some stuff. It was brutal at other times. It was tough. There's moments, which every relationship has that. And they're like, but we just figured it out eventually. And we compromised and she gave a little and I gave a little. And now, we've been married for 42 years and And that's great. And everybody applauds and that's incredible. And then you're like, well, they're not super happy.
Thanks again for tuning in to Unfiltered Radio. My name is Bryant Golden, the host of this program, and I'm also the pastor of Centerpoint Church. And the way we describe Centerpoint is an alternative to church as usual. So if you are in the Tampa Bay area, I want to invite you to check out Centerpoint in person or join our digital campus anywhere around the world. Just go to centerpointfl.org.
At Unfiltered, we exist to start unfiltered conversations that inspire people to love with purpose. Every single week, we receive stories of lives and families that have been radically changed by this program. If you've been impacted by Unfiltered Radio, would you consider giving a one-time or recurring gift at www.unfilteredradio.com/donate. Thanks so much for your financial support in leading people towards purpose and hope.
I mean, they're not unhappy either, but they're not super happy. And it's just like one of those things where it's like we think the goal is we'll just grind it out, figure it out, make it work, compromise enough, so we can be married for a long time. And then everybody applauds that. And that's great. But that's not the goal. Yeah. And what happens a lot of times in those relationships where it's a relationship based on compromise is what happens underneath the surface is there's a lot of scorekeeping. And it's good as long as you're pulling your weight and I'm pulling my weight, but it becomes a little bit contractual. And what happens in that, there's actually becomes low levels of trust. Because there's not a lot of margin. And by the way, it's just a side note. Where there's low trust, there's low intimacy, which really hinders your sex life. And we think great sex has everything to do with sex. It has almost nothing to do with sex. It has everything to do with trust. When you have trust, you have intimacy. And a lot of times you have a great sex life. Yes. And we'll talk about that later in the series. Yeah, you can clap for that. I haven't clapped all message if I start talking about sex and I get you out of your seat. And that's great. Because when you don't have trust, you never feel like you can fully open yourself up to the other person. You can't be vulnerable. And so consequently, you're never fully fulfilled. So let me just put it this way, and then we'll move on. A compromised relationship is fueled by a commitment to the wrong thing. Because it's fueled by a commitment to the relationship. And you're like, okay, that was the goal. No, it's not. Because you heard, I'm committed to our marriage. Nicole and I, early on, we had dinner with this couple. We had gotten this advice from people like stalk is what I'm trying to say. Stalk couples that like really like kind of further along, they've got some wisdom, and just try to learn from them. So that's what we did. Like we just stalk people, not in a weird way, but like, hey, we just wanted to do dinner.
Well,
we want to ask you
sometimes.
questions. Yeah. Please meet with us. And so we would do that, ask them questions. And there was just one couple where that was kind of their story. It's like, well, we've been married for a while. We just figured it out. We grinded it out. And they compromised. And we got done and we walked away. And I remember us, from my recollection, like both just like, that's not what we want. That's not what we're going to pursue. Because at the end of the day, and I think I maybe even said this, I can't remember, but like, I don't want you to be committed to our marriage. I want you to be committed to me. And I want to be committed to you. And here's the thing, like, and you know this already, but nobody marries a marriage.
Yeah.
You marry a person. Now, I'll just say this. If all you got right now is being committed to the marriage, go for it. Stay in for that, because that's better than not being committed to it. Yes. I'm just saying that's not the goal. That's not the relationship goal. And you can make it work, but it's not going to be amazing. And I don't think it's going to be all that God created it to be. Because at the end of the day, I made a commitment to Nicole that I want to love her. I want to give my life for her, and vice versa. And when you get two people doing that, that's amazing relationship. Yeah. But me long term, for whatever many years, just being committed to the marriage, that's not that great. And there's not going to be that much intimacy. And you might even be married for 40 some years, but it's not all that God is inviting you into. And so for some of us, a lot of us, Unfiltered Radio podcast, you're watching, you're in the house. That's where a lot of us are. We're just committed to a marriage, and God's going, no, I'm inviting you into a whole lot more.
Yeah. And the more that he's inviting us into is the verse that we touched on a little bit last week. It's John 13:34. And it says this, a new command I give you, love one another. And when Jesus is sharing this scripture, he's in the upper room. You've probably heard about the upper room, but he's just in the room with his disciples, his followers. And Jesus knows that in a couple of hours, he's going to die. And so these are some of his last words. The disciples aren't aware of that yet, but these are some of his last words. And he's saying, a new command I give you, love one another. And his disciples are like, dude, we know that already, right? The entire Old Testament, all of the laws and the commands are centered around loving one another. So that isn't new for us. We understand that. And Jesus is like, oh, I haven't given you the new part yet. The new part's coming. Here's the new part. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And I'm not a mind reader. I wasn't in the room, obviously, but I'm guessing that when Jesus said this second part of the verse, as I have loved you, the disciples stopped in their tracks and they started thinking through specifically how Jesus had loved each and every one of them at their absolute worst. You think about Matthew, one of the disciples, he was a tax collector, which if you have studied that culture, heard anything about the culture, he had aligned himself with Rome. And so the Jewish people really hated him. He took money from them. He taxed them. You don't really like taxes, I'm sure, so you can understand some of the angst. But Jesus came up to him and said, Matthew, follow me. And Matthew followed him. And then John, who ends up being referred to as the disciple of love. I don't know if you know this, but initially he was referred to as a son of thunder. He had a terrible anger problem. And yet Jesus took that anger and he turned it into love. And I could go on and on with stories about these disciples, but I think in that moment they realized this is what Jesus' love has done for us. And yet they didn't know that in just a couple of hours, Jesus was going to take it one step further and he was going to die for them. And so these are the verses that the entire New Testament centers around. When you don't know what to do, you need to ask the question, what does love demand of you? What does love demand? What did Jesus do for you? He died for you so you could have life. And so are you laying down your life for your spouse and for those you're in relationship with? The entire New Testament centers around these verses. It's informed by these verses, and it becomes terrifyingly clear of what we're to do in our relationships.
If you're just joining us, my name is Bryant Golden. I'm the host of this program called Unfiltered Radio and the pastor of Centerpoint Church in the Tampa, Florida area. And right now we're in a series called Relationship Goals, just talking about really practical insights for relationships. So if you missed any part of this series, you can just go to unfilteredradio.com and catch up, or go to your favorite podcast catcher and type Unfiltered Radio and listen right there. And here's what I want to let you know. If our messages have helped you and you just want to help us continue the reach of this program around this local area and around the world, you can give financially at unfilteredradio.com/donate. And if you would like to connect with me, you can just go to Facebook at Bryant Golden Unfiltered or on Instagram at Bryant Golden, and I would love to just connect with you there. And then one other way you can connect is via my weekly email, which you can sign up for at unfilteredradio.com. Thanks so much for listening.